those of you, I guess as all of you who don't know me, I wasn't here for the first part of this workshop. My name is John Ifra. I work together with Tzachi Fried at Machon Dvir. I'm a clinician there, a social worker, and I'll be co-presenting with Yochanan tonight. Okay, so different than the first presentation, this is going to be a bit more specific. The first was a bit more general in terms of how to be a madrich and what the demands are and how to cope with particular situations. This is going to be much more focused on working with complicated students, particularly students that have a background of trauma. So how to be able to recognize particular warning signs, how to cope effectively with them, what you can do as a madrich, what you're not able to do as a madrich, and how to kind of cope effectively with that terrain, because there are students, there will be students that come in with a heavy background and really present extraordinarily challenging situations. Okay, so without further ado, bear with me while I figure out how to use. Okay, so first topic is identifying what is trauma. Right, so that's a term that's thrown around a lot. Right, it was traumatic. I'm traumatized. That was so traumatic. But what do we mean when we talk about a trauma? Right. So if you think about any experience in life that any of us have, they're really broken down into a number of different components. So we have a sensory aspect to them. We feel things inside. We see things. We hear things. We smell things. Right. Those are all parts of our experience in everyday life, regardless of what we're doing. But it's certainly relevant to trauma as well. We also have particular beliefs or thoughts, beliefs about ourselves in any particular situation, thoughts about ourselves or other people in any particular situation, emotions that come along with those beliefs or thoughts, right? So this is all kind of this complicated picture that we all experience every moment of every day, right? We've got things going on. We don't generally break it down into all its different components, nor should we at every moment, right? That would be totally overwhelming. It would take away from us interacting in the present moment, but this is always going on. And when it becomes extraordinarily important is when we're trying to look at our past or getting a sense of issues from the past that were so overwhelming that that experience, the sensory, the beliefs, the emotions, the sensations, all kind of get stuck and frozen in time. Right, so most experience that we have in life, even if they're uncomfortable, we get through them, we get past them, and ideally we learn from them. So we got up and we said something, something stupid, and then we say, oh gosh, that was such a stupid thing. Why'd I say that? And we learn from it, and the next time we don't repeat the same mistake. And that's really what mistakes are made for, so we can learn from them now and cope more effectively in the future. And we all do that. That's part of life, and that's part of growth. Trauma comes about when there's an experience that is so acutely overwhelming that the experience is not able to be processed in the mind, meaning that it has this kind of frozen in time effect where those emotions that we had at the time of that event, those beliefs that we had at the time of the event, either the sensations that we had in our body at the time of the event, et cetera, can all be triggered again in the present moment. So there's a famous quote by I think somebody, Faulkner, who said that the past is never dead, it's not even the past. And that is very apropos to trauma, because all it takes is something in the present moment that has a scent of that past traumatic experience, and that triggers this tripwire. And boom, that person is thrown right back into that moment. And they don't differentiate between the now and the then. The then becomes the now. And they all become fused, they collide with one another, and they're re-traumatized, they experience the same thing all over again. Now, from an outsider's perspective, you might look at a student who's experiencing this and say, dude, that didn't happen. He didn't mean that. Like, well, you're taking this so hard. What's the big deal? But he doesn't experience it that way. He may even be able to recognize that when he's calmed down a bit, to recognize that, well, maybe I blew it out of proportion. But in that moment, when that trigger hits, he gets flown back into the past, and he's re-experiencing what he experienced then, whatever that then was. And this is not some kind of like, just stop it or get over it. Or why can't you just see why you're being irrational. There's chemistry going on in the brain that does not allow him to kind of just snap out of it right away. The part of our body or our brain that's responsible for storing trauma and for kind of creating this collision effect from the past and the present is a tiny little pea on both hemispheres of the brain called the amygdala. Now, I'll see if I can get I think the next slide has it. Here we go. So if you look, there's what's it called? It's labeled there towards the bottom of the brain. And that small thing, which is, again, it's about the size of a pea, I believe, and it's on both hemispheres of the brain, is called the amygdala. The amygdala is in charge of fight, flight, freeze, right? So if, I don't know, we're in a virtual room right now, but if we were all in a non-virtual room and somebody would come in with a machete, right? So probably most of us would run, maybe some would freeze. And if you're a triple black belt in karate, maybe you'd go ahead and you'd fight with him. But all of those responses would be determined by the amygdala. And what's so tricky about this tiny little piece of the brain, which can wreak a lot of havoc, is that if you look at this diagram, this guy sees a snake. So the message goes from his eyes to his brain and goes to this hub called the thalamus. From the thalamus splits it into two parts. It sends it to the visual cortex, which is in charge of it's a higher functioning part of the brain, more to do with our seichel, with our intellect. But there's a trap door that goes right to the amygdala. So before we're able to cognitively process this scary thing, our amygdala is already activated. And this is how it works with trauma. So a snake is an objectively threatening thing. Nobody wants to be, alone with a snake in a jungle. So the amygdala's firing response is appropriate. There's a threat, run away. But when it comes to trauma, what ends up happening is the amygdala starts to become activated in situations that are not objectively threatening, but are subjectively threatening. So it's experienced as a real threat, and the amygdala starts to go haywire. So, and their body responds in kind. Their body starts to go haywire. So the experience is frightening and traumatic for this individual, even though for somebody on the outside who doesn't have that history, to kind of throw up their arms and say, "Hey, dude, what's the big deal?" So the most common example that's used when illustrating this point is a war veteran, right? So they're off in Iraq or here. They're in Soketan, and they're being bombarded by rockets every day. They're going in with their friends into the line of fire. There's bullets, there's rockets. It's very loud, and it's very frightening. The war is over. They go back home. Thank God everything's okay. They're walking down the street one day, and they hear fireworks going, or firecrackers going off, and they freak out and hit the deck, so to speak. So anybody else watching would think, "Wait, what's this guy doing? It's an innocuous firework. What's the big deal?" But for him, the amygdala gets activated way before he's able to cognitively put together what's going on, and he's right back in that war zone. Okay. There are two types of trauma, right? It's not just war that can create a trauma response, and it's not just an earthquake. Doesn't need to be some crazy thing that a person experiences, right? So rape, natural disaster, a terrible car accident, physical abuse, sexual abuse, very often that's what we think about when we think of trauma. And that's what some call big T trauma, where there is a life-threatening, some type of a life-threatening event or some type of event that's related to bodily harm. There's another kind called little T trauma, which I don't know if we'll come into contact with it more or less, but it certainly will come into contact with it in yeshivas, which is somebody who has gone through a life of neglect. There was a terrible divorce in the family. There was terrible financial stress in the family. They were poked fun at in school and or at home. There's been persistent criticism from authority figures. The list could go on and on. But those type of experiences, experienced consistently over time, especially if it's from a very young age, will make a mark on the brain. And that's what they call a little T trauma, which means that if you have a bacher who's in yeshiva and I don't know, his Rebbe throws out a line in yeshiva, he has a bad pshat, and he says, "Oh, that's a balabatish pshat." The guy may totally overreact. Everybody looking may say, yo, come on. He was just, that's just how they talk. That's how they talk. But he might leave the room and ruminate about it for hours and hours and hours and think about what a terrible person the Rebbe is and how stupid he is and what's wrong with me and why does this always happen, and get stuck inside of this funk. What's happening is there's old stuff that's getting kicked up into the present, and he's not able to differentiate between the reality of now and the reality of then. He gets stuck in that space. Yochanan, is there anything that you wanted to add?
I just want, I like an example that I give sometimes, like 90-10. 10% of what I'm experiencing was because of the said stimulus, right? Whatever happened to me. 90% of what I'm feeling is somewhere in the past. So the best way, that guys relate to this, if you've ever driven a car, something called road rage, right? Road rage is a phenomena. Like, what's actually happening? I'm going 60 miles an hour, 65 miles an hour, and some guy goes 75 miles an hour, cuts in front of me, and then, drops down to 65 miles an hour. And next thing I know, I want to kill him and his entire family. Like, whoa, what happened? Or I feel like rolling down my window and screaming at him, right? So this is like a 90-10. 10% of what happened is annoying. The guy wasn't courteous, right? He wasn't considerate. Now, what he's experiencing in that moment is every single time when he built his Lego and his big brother came and stepped on it. Every time he was disrespected, every time he wasn't considered, his feelings were pushed aside. So even if they're not, big T traumas, little T traumas, we all, and you'll come across guys who are not necessarily traumatized by the things on this list, but because they've experienced an accumulative amount of pain, or what we would call, let's say, neglect is the first one on the list, or disrespect, it comes all out in certain moments. And that's, we've heard people say the word, I'm triggered right now, right? Or he's pushing my buttons, right? Have you ever heard someone say, he's pushing my buttons? That's because we all have these buttons. And, in Lumdis, we would say, kafi the shear that a person has, these negative experiences that are not dealt with. So those buttons are either bigger or smaller. Now, it could be because they weren't dealt with, or it could be there are some individuals, and again, you'll come across certain people who cope better in life and worse in life. And that's because maybe someone was just born really sensitive. There's a book called The Artist's Way for people who have a different kind of brain. They're more sensitive, or because a person might be sensory, right? So physically they were born with more sensations, and they're sensitive to light or sensitive to noise. These people also will have bigger buttons, so to speak. So it's really, there's no way you're not going to come across these things. If you're a madrich, a teacher, a rebbe, anything you're going to have a few kids, and certainly you're going to have what's called, overreactions, where a person becomes dysregulated because he's experiencing it in a really unreasonable way because he was triggered. I just love that road rage example. We're gonna go. Is it my turn now?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk about behavioral warning signs. Very quickly, behavioral warning signs. Some of them are truly obvious, some of them less so. The obvious ones are someone's drinking too much, someone's smoking or doing drugs, someone's really doing damaging things like, God forbid, cutting themselves, or someone's talking about suicide, or really has a deep depression and not getting out of bed for days at a time. So those are the obvious ones, right? Then there could be a person who is just socially not really with the program, right? His hygiene could be off. His sleeping patterns could be erratic. He just, he's the type of guy, he has different hours than everybody else. These aren't necessarily signs of trauma, but they're warning flags. Poor boundaries. A person might just, want to talk to the Rebbe a lot. He might just, come and sit on your bed. Or he might, if you're a Madrich, he might just call you at, 11:30 on a Thursday night, can I come for Shabbos, right? These aren't necessarily signs of trauma, but they are red flags, And just like we had big T, little t, so we have big red flags and little red flags. And the little red flags are boundaries where a person maybe is listening into other people's conversations. He's the type of guy where you're schmoozing with a person your age and he'll come in and just invite himself into the conversation when it's not appropriate. He'll jump in when it's not really his turn to talk. He'll interrupt people. He'll text you consistently, or someone who's in your space will stand too close to you. Again, these are all things to notice. We don't have to think, okay, this guy has trauma. Let's make sure we deal with this. Let's call Amudim. Let's call Machon Dvir. Let's get this kid a therapist. Not necessarily, but it's something that as the year progresses, you want to maybe take some time aside and ask this person, more about him, see if you could connect to him, because it's a red flag that if there's enough of them, or you see it consistently enough, so there's something there where, like John was saying, there's something there that he's not always acting bisechel, right? Not using his cortex. He's in his amygdala. He's in a different part of his brain, which makes him awkward, right? Socially different. He could just be different, and that's fine also. Volatile reactions, overreactions to things, underreactions to things, not wanting to participate, avoidant behavior, avoiding things that are fun, a trip, a barbecue, a kumsitz. These are things that people like to join into. They're enriching, they're feel-good moments in the yeshiva, where if this guy is just he'd rather just be on his phone, he just sits in the corner, doesn't engage. These are, again, things to look into. Doesn't want to participate in the in Shabbos, always finds a way to get out of group participation, okay? Then there's things that are a little bit more telling, where, when we're talking about trauma, many things could happen to a person because of trauma, especially with the big T. And that could be where a person starts to develop an actual personality disorder. When does it go from this person has issues to he really needs help? He needs to see a therapist. Maybe he's on the cusp of developing, or maybe he's at risk for developing a personality disorder. So when a person starts to use manipulation in a way that you see that he's splitting people, he's making fights in the dira, he's making fights in the classroom, he's somehow getting rabbeim to disagree with each other and get almost into different hashkafic arguments over things. He's finding a way to grind an axe that's not really there. Now that's more of a telling sign of a personality disorder. This is something that John deals with on a daily basis, probably at Machon Dvir. One of their expertise is helping people, men and women, through these types of disorders. And you might pick it up if you notice that a person is splitting people. He's causing other people to be upset, right? He's causing people to get into fights with other friends. He's making people choose him over another friend. Well, you're going to hang out with me or hang out with him, not both of us, things like that. And then obviously the physical things, if there's a lot of weight gain in a year, again, you have the frontline opportunity to really witness these kids over several months daily. So if there's a big weight loss or a big weight gain, God forbid you should see cutting, if any kind of burning marks, cigarette marks, these things are already, again, big T issues usually, and any kind of eating disorder, big T issues. And that's when you want to, if you see these things as a Rebbe, as a Madrich, that is when you make that phone call, to Machon Dvir, to Amudim, to just discuss it, to get a better idea. Maybe you try having a conversation with the student about, I noticed you doing this X, Y, or Z, you want to talk about it. And if they don't want to talk about it, it's okay, but at least you gave them the opportunity. So that's more of just, noticing these behaviors, noticing that these are warning signs. And there could be several that add up, that accumulate, or there could be some major ones. So look out for all of them. I'm going to send it back to John now, talking about self-harm more in depth.
Okay. Any question on anything Yochanan just said regarding the behavioral warning signs?
Specifically with questioning the Rebbeim to pivot them against each other, how do you tell if that's something to look out for, or if the guy is very inquisitive?
Right. So excellent question. John, you want to answer?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so again, that type of thing, this is called manipulation, okay? Often the person isn't trying to do it consciously. It's important to know that they're not actually always aware of what they're doing. This is a survival technique that they had to learn when they were younger to survive maybe an alcoholic father or an abusive brother, or God forbid something worse, right? Sexual abuse. They had to learn very quickly how to play people. And they get stuck in that mode of playing people, of manipulating people, because they always view themselves in some kind of danger. It's subconscious, they're not aware of it. And because they view themselves in danger, they're always trying to see how to divide and conquer. You know, the best way, you know, from like battle strategy, divide and conquer. So they're trying to split people, and we see it all the time. Let's say I'm a case manager and John is a therapist, and we have a client like this. The client will try to get me and John confused about our approach about how to handle him. Not on purpose, but he'll do it in a way, and really because he's scared when there's people who are collaborating in a way even to help him. So we might not pick up on it, and often we don't pick up on it right away, right? The first time it happens, we don't pick up on it, but we put a mental note, hey, that's interesting. What am I feeling around this person? So I would say the number one thing to take into account when this type of thing is happening is, what are you feeling around this person? Do you feel uncomfortable around this person? Do you feel like this person is asking too much from you, or is making you feel bad about not inviting him for Shabbos? Or is this person coming to tell you like, hey, Rebbe so-and-so invited me and you never invite me, or he never invites, he doesn't really care about us, or, oh, really, this Rebbe says this about, curfew, and you say this about curfew, and they bring other people into things. Now, if it happens once or twice, so a lot of people manipulate, they want to get away with the rules. We understand that. They're trying to curry favor maybe, but if you start to see a pattern, right, that it's not just with you, actually it happened in the dormitory also. He didn't like one of his roommates. Guess what? He figured out a way to get rid of that roommate by making a fight between him and another roommate. So if you see that arguments follow this person, if you see in your own emotions that you start to feel uncomfortable, you start to feel like not good about yourself, you start doubting your methodology, you start doubting what if you're helping this person, you start feeling bad maybe around this person, about maybe you need to do more from this person, like you're guilted into something. You have to take a step back and say, wait a second, is this person doing this in a way that's unhealthy? Or is he just actually asking for Shabbos? Like you have to take a step back and look about what this student is causing in the yeshiva. Is he causing fights in the yeshiva? Is he causing people to argue? Did he somehow ruin a school trip for everybody because the Rebbe said if you don't wear masks, or you don't keep the rules of the quarantine, where we're all not going to be able to go out to the beach next Tuesday? Was he the guy who did that? That type of thing. Did that help, Yeshua? Is that the one?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. John, anything to add on that?
Maybe just to reiterate something that you had mentioned earlier, which is that it's not being done on purpose. It's being done subconsciously, which means that it's also being done in a very low-key kind of way. And like Yochanan was saying, it is crucial to take that step back and kind of ask myself those questions. Do I feel funny about this? Am I feeling guilty? Am I feeling like I need to do more? Do I feel like I'm being sucked into something that I'm not quite comfortable with? Do I feel like I'm doing things that are not necessarily in line with my value system, and I can't really figure out why I'm doing it? Do I feel pressure to do things I'm not comfortable with? But it's very easy for us to kind of get sucked into it without realizing what's going on. And without taking that step back, it's extraordinarily hard to see. They may also be touching on things within us. If we have an inclination towards people pleasing, if we've had difficult relationships in our lives in the past, and now we find an opportunity to help somebody, if we're satisfying certain needs of our own by being in this relationship, and all of a sudden now their buttons are touching our buttons, and you get this enmeshed kind of button relationship. And again, like Yochanan, that taking a step back, it's extraordinarily hard to see. And this is really where kind of self-introspection and checking with oneself is extraordinarily important.
Thanks.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next. Yeah. Okay, understanding and responding to self-harm. Something that Yochanan just touched on as well in terms of, really big red flags. When we talk about self-harm, what do we mean? We're not necessarily talking about suicide. We're talking about non-fatal, intentional, self-injurious behavior resulting in actual tissue damage, illness, or risk of death. So we're not talking about outright suicide attempts. We're talking about things that are inflicting bodily harm. So some examples, which may not be necessary. People may have seen this at this point in their lives firsthand, but they are multifaceted. Self-harm is very colorful, right? It can be manifested in cutting, right? And cutting with anything a person can get their hand on. It can be cutting with a knife. It can be cutting with a screwdriver. It can be cutting with a nail clipper, with a safety pin. It can be poking, it can be anything, right? It's a very creative activity. Scratching, scratching one's wrist, scratching one's stomach, scratching one's thighs. If there are scabs that are formed on the body, not allowing them to heal, consistently peeling them off anywhere they can find them, constantly causing them to bleed and never heal. Burning, taking a cigarette and sticking it on anywhere on a person's body, lighting a match and putting it out on a person's body, suffocating oneself with a bag or with a belt and then letting go at the last moment, hitting themselves, and other, right? This is one of those activities that can take on pretty much any form. Which kind of begs the question of, why? Why would anybody want to do that to themselves, right? What purpose, what function does self-harm have for an individual who's in distress, right? It almost seems counterproductive. If I'm feeling really terrible, why do I want to add fuel to the flames and feel not only emotionally like I'm in hell, but physically like I'm in hell as well? So if you take a look on the screen, here are 6 reasons that were collected as to explain as to why somebody might harm themselves. Now, before looking at them, right, 6 reasons means that there's not one. So if we see somebody self-harming, it doesn't necessarily point to, well, they're self-harming because we don't know necessarily what it's doing it for them. But here are some possibilities. One is to distract themselves, right? To alter the focus of their attention or regain control over their minds when experiencing pressing, unavoidable, and overwhelming feelings or thoughts. So they may be in a zone that we call in psychology being hyper-aroused, right? So if here's a diagram with my hands. If you can see where my head is, right? So my head is what we would call a window of tolerance. And window of tolerance means that we're in a zone and we're in a state of mind where life is relatively okay. Things are under control. I'm capable of coping. My forehead, right, which is big enough to illustrate this, is what we call being hyper-aroused, and my chin would be hypo-aroused, right? Hyper-arousal is when life becomes chaotic. My amygdala is really firing, right, at full blast, and I feel completely out of control. My thoughts are racing, my emotions are out of control, my urges are out of control. I simply can't cope with this reality. It's way too overwhelming and way too painful. The opposite extreme is being hypo-aroused, which means that because I am in so much distress that I just hit the abort button and I dissociate. I go off into la la land. So I what's the word I'm looking for? I cognitively just zoom out, and I go into a place where my affect is flat. I kind of like in this zombie mode or this dreamlike state where I'm floating through reality. But for all intents and purposes, my body, my brain is up there, because being in the same place at the same time is just too much. So the first one is really addressing hyperarousal. When I feel like life becomes simply too chaotic and I can't cope, I need something, anything to get me out of this torment. So songs aren't doing it, movies aren't doing it, pornography's not doing it. Nothing seems to be strong enough to help me right now. Cutting is doing it, because it is something that is so physiologically grounding that it pulls me right into that action. And my attention is taken from all of that distress, all of those thoughts, all of those terrible sensations inside, right to that cut on my arm, right to that feeling of pain in my arm. And that sure beats the alternative. The second one they have here is to release tension associated with strong emotions or overwhelming thoughts. There's so much bubbling inside. I need to get some of them out, and cutting is one way of doing it. 3 is to feel something physical when they are otherwise associated and numb. So thinking once again about that window of tolerance, this time it's at my chin, right? I'm hypo-aroused. So I'm in that zombie-like state. I'm pulled out of reality. I feel nothing. And I want to get back. I don't want to feel nothing. This is terrible. So one way of getting back is hurting myself, right? It's almost like unavoidable, right? It's like, feeling really numb and then turning the water on in the shower and freezing cold and going in. You have no choice other than to experience that freezing cold water. It's just too physiologically jolting. So it brings the person right back. 4 is to express themselves, to communicate and or document strong emotions they are feeling and cannot otherwise articulate. So this goes a bit back more into what Yochanan was describing before in terms of ineffective communication. Telling other people that I'm in distress, but in a way that is completely ineffective. I need to inflict harm on myself in order to let other people know that I am hurting, because I don't know how to do it otherwise. That might come up in ways where, they might cut in places where you can see, like make a cut on the face or cut on the hands, but in a place that might show up so that you will accidentally kind of look at it and say, hey man, what is that? 5 is to punish themselves. I'm such a wretched, terrible person. What is wrong with me, right? This always happens to me anywhere that I go. My friends always reject me. People never want to hang out with me. I always get close to people. Then all of a sudden, for no reason that I can explain, people start to push me away. Going, I must be such a terrible person. I deserve this. And I'll cut myself to punish myself for all the wrong that I've done. And the last is an experience a temporary but intense feeling of euphoria that occurs in the immediate aftermath of self-harm, right? So self-harming can release dopamine, right? It makes people feel good. It gives them a rush. And that physiological experience, that euphoria, again, is another way of hitting that abort button. This feels so bad. If I can cut, that will feel so good. I'm out of here into a place that for the time being feels way better than what I was experiencing, a few minutes ago. Okay. I'm going to go to responding to self-harm, but before I do that, are there any questions on self-harm thus far? No. Okay. Responding to self-harm. So here you are, you're a Madrichim in Yeshiva, and for one of those 6 reasons, you've got a student that is self-harming. Either you catch them in the act, you walk into the room at some point, you find them with a razor, and they're cutting their legs or their thighs or their arms, or you find them taking their cigarette, and burning it out somewhere on their body, picking scabs, not letting them heal, or any other, again, of the various ways they can do it. Or you don't catch them in the act, but you notice they've got cuts all up and down their arms. You go on a tiyul, and they take off their shirt, right? You're in the beach and going into the water. You notice that there's cuts all over their stomach. Or they put on their shorts and they play basketball, and you notice that there are cuts all over their legs. You say, well, okay, I just went to this workshop with Amudim and Machon Dvir. Okay, I know this is a red flag. Maybe this is a big key trauma. You start putting things together. Okay, what do you do with all of that? Okay, so like Yochanan mentioned before, to approach them, see if they'd be willing to talk about it. It is crucial that it be done in a way that is non-judgmental, right? If you come in and you say, oh my gosh, what is wrong with you? Why would you do that to yourself? Are you out of your mind? You're going to get an infection. You're going to kill yourself. What are you doing? You're such a great guy. Why'd you do this to yourself? There's no reason for this. Right, so that's not going to go. In fact, it'll have the opposite effect. It'll feel completely invalidated and not understood. And it'll break whatever ties, whatever opportunity there is for discussion, it'll break that. Validating. Validating doesn't mean that you say, hey man, look, I get it. Self-harm is the way to go. You're in a lot of distress. You're a pretty nasty person. You deserve this. Punish yourself. That's the way to go. Or, euphoria. We all want to experience euphoria. This is the only way you can get it. Go ahead. That's not what validation means. Validation means I get it, that you are in a really tough place. You're experiencing things that, I can't imagine, that you are really stuck, that you don't feel there's any way out, that life becomes so unbearable for you that this is the only way to cope with it, right, at this point in life. Are you willing to tell me more about what's going on? So we're not validating the behavior as a good idea. We are validating the distress that they are in and what is motivating them to engage in that kind of behavior. Staying grounded. This is a hard one, right? If you haven't experienced this in the past, and I don't know anybody here, and I can only see one face. If you haven't experienced this in the past, it can be quite jolting, right? That's a scary thing. You find out that a person's cutting. You find out somebody that you're responsible for is cutting. Do I have to be on top of them all the time? What does this mean? Do I have to rush them to an emergency room right now? Are they in danger? Are their cuts infected? So it's very easy to get into a panicky place. And then they might tell you more. Let's say, you don't feel panicky. You engage them in conversation. Then they really tell you what's going on. Actually, I'm cutting multiple times a day. This is something that I do frequently. In fact, I've been doing this since I'm 15. And you're the first person I've ever told. Please don't tell anybody. Right? So there's a lot to be jolted over here. And it's also really important, to the best of your ability, to stay grounded in the best way that you can. Encourage them to speak to a professional. I just found out about Amudim. Here's their number. Give them a call. I just found out about Machon Dvir. Here's their number. Give them a call. I know this is something that they that they specialize in. If they're already being treated in therapy and they're actively cutting, encourage them, if they have, to use their coping tools. What have you learned so far? What have you learned to have these urges? Or can you call your therapist? Can you give them a call and let them know what's going on right now? Another is to let the yeshiva know. This should not be your little secret between this student and you. It is too much of a responsibility to bear. It is not fair to you, and it's also not fair to them. When you see these big red flags, as Yochanan put it before, these big T red flags, don't go into that territory all on your own. You don't have to go into it all on your own. Now, again, what oftentimes gets complicated is what Yochanan mentioned before, that there may start to, the other person may try to bring you into a relationship that you're not comfortable with. Please don't tell anybody, I'm going to get help as soon as I can. If you tell somebody I'm going to cut even more, it's going to send me into a tailspin. You don't know what telling me Yeshiva is going to do for me. I've been fine all this time. For the last 4 years that I've been doing this, I've been fine. You don't have to tell anybody. Don't start now. I confided in you. How could you break my trust like this? You're the first person I told, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Be aware of that. The pull to go into that water with them is very, very strong. The boundaries are, which I think we'll get to later, are extraordinarily important. Be fair to yourself. Also beware of positive reinforcement. This is maybe a bit beyond the scope of this presentation, but I'll just mention it briefly. If self-harm is being used as a means of communication, each time it's done, you end up spending 3 hours having a heart-to-heart with the guy. It may then be positively reinforced. It may actually, perhaps counterintuitively, on the one hand, you think that you're helping this guy, giving him all the time in the world, but when he sees that, it may turn into something where this is the only way he knows how to get to that heart-to-heart. The only way I know how to get Yehuda or Nachum's attention and to get that heart-to-heart is to start cutting myself. I just make a little cut, and then I'll make sure that he sees it when we pass by in the hallway, and I'll get those 3 hours. Okay, that was a mouthful. Any questions on self-harm in theory or responding to self-harm? Okay, I'm shocked. Either I was extraordinarily clear, beyond my wildest dreams, or this is something that's completely new and people are still processing, or people are exercising while listening to the presentation. All of the above are fine with me, especially the first one. But okay. So if there's no questions, I will. Okay, if there's no questions, I'll pass the mic to Yochanan.
Okay, thank you, John. I thought it was super clear and well presented. Just wanted to be omed on one point. It's super important, if you're not necessarily walking into a room, but maybe someone wants to disclose this information to you. You're a madrich and you are having a heart-to-heart till 3 a.m. and you notice the guy's depressed and you do ask him what's wrong, or you notice that he's splitting and you ask him what's wrong, and he divulges to you that he's been doing some form of cutting or something like that. So the inform the yeshiva thing is so important, but what's even more important is that you tell them you're going to. It shouldn't be, whether you walk in on them or whether they tell you, it shouldn't be something that you do behind their back. Not that you're doing it behind their back, but it should be something, that's a good question, how common is self-harm? But just let me finish this one. It's a great question, Rabbi. The importance of reacting in a way that encourages their trust in you. So when you're completely honest with them and you say, listen, I just have to tell you straight from the beginning, and it also takes away some of the discomfort of waiting a day or two. If right away you say, listen, I'm uncomfortable holding this myself. This is an important thing, and we're going to share it with the Rebbe. And you could even invite them along to come with you. Say, I'm going to go to Rabbi Goodwin, and we're going to talk about it together. If you want to come with me, you can come with me. If you don't, it's okay. And, the Rebbe will call you. And of course, the Rebbe also will tell him that you're going to pass it on probably, to a therapist, to someone to get, mental health professional advice. But it's so important not to try to protect them, but rather to tell them, be honest with them. This is something I have to talk about with the Hanhala, with the yeshiva. And I think eventually they will come to respect that you are honest from the get-go. Okay, Rabbi Goodman wants to know how prevalent is self-harm? John, what do you say?
Okay, it's a really good question. I don't know the statistics. I don't know how prevalent it is, although there are certain presentations that it comes along with. A borderline personality disorder very often comes along with self-harm. When that is seen, meaning when there are red flags, like Yochanan was describing before, when there is kind of this splitting going on in regards to Rebbeim or the staff, if you're at a staff meeting and you notice that half the Rebbeim feel very strongly one way and the other half the Rebbeim feel very strongly the other way, and it's all about a particular Talmud, that's a red flag. If you notice that their relationships are a bit erratic, they have best friends and they have enemies, they love this guy and then they hate this guy, that might be a sign also for BPD. Things like real paranoia might be a sign for BPD. Relationships is usually the real red flag, and the one that oftentimes is extraordinarily apparent, especially in yeshiva setting, where relationships is such a big part of such a social environment and such a big part of life, and especially in the Rebbe Talmud relationship. Very often they'll be looking for somebody who is perfect, who can provide perfect care. And they'll ask for things that, again, put us in this position where we're uncomfortable doing it for them. They want a lot of time. They don't want us talking to anybody else other than them. So when we see those types of things, that very often can be a red flag for, okay, self-harm may be a part of that picture. If there are other kind of presentations of BPD, self-harm can be a part of that picture. But again, in terms of statistics, I don't know. I don't know how prevalent it is. In terms of looking out for it, very often, guys will roll up their sleeves and it can be seen on the arms, that anywhere from the shoulder all the way down to the fingers, looking for guys picking at scabs, constantly not allowing them to heal, finding burn marks, marks on the body that most people don't have. So those are kind of the red flags that are most easily noticeable in terms of picking up on it in students in yeshiva.
They'll have so I hope that's Rabbi Goodman, I hope that helped. In other words, there will be other simanim, usually, like people who I've seen with cutting are, people who started off one lifestyle and they changed to a different lifestyle. That was a pretty big shift. They pierced an ear, maybe they got a tattoo. It might be a company with an eating disorder. They lost a lot of weight. They have some anorexia. They gained a lot of weight. So these types of things that can help identify. Probably it's rare. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like it's serious cases.
And a good one to ask, picking at scabs, it's a question, is that often a type of OCD behavior? Was that a question, Rabbi Goodwin, based off of something you'd heard previously, or when I said BPD was heard as OCD? Okay, I don't know. Either way, I'm not familiar with that in terms of OCD. Picking at scabs. Yeah, that's not something I'm familiar with in terms of the clinical presentation of somebody with OCD. I could be mistaken. Yochanan, are you familiar with something otherwise?
No, I mean, it's distress, usually. Picking at scabs is distress. And somehow trying to cope with distress or in other ways. I haven't seen it with OCD.
Yeah. Okay.
But, you could rule nothing out, but, there's always the anomalies.
Right. It also may be that somebody presents with OCD, but it's a comorbid disorder, meaning they might have OCD and some other thing as well. So maybe OCD, with depression and anxiety, and it can be a whole cocktail. So that's also possible.
Right. One more thing which we didn't mention, which I realized also with the borderline, it's threatening to leave the yeshiva. Someone is always threatening to leave. That could be a big thing. There are, you see that a lot. There's someone that's the way they get their attention. They're threatening to leave. So it's something to look out for. Okay, I think we're going to head into addictions. Is that what we're up to?
Yes, understanding addictive behaviors. Yeah.
Okay. So to understand addictive behaviors, really there's three main predictors. Okay. One of them is trauma. So if a person, a lot of people have dabbled with some addiction, whether they watched some porn and, for a while they really enjoyed it and they liked it, but then they realized it's the wrong thing, or it was against their moral code, or they learned how it's really, bad for the women involved in these things, that it's really very abusive. So they stop watching, and maybe they struggle with it a little bit, but they stop. Same thing, marijuana, everyone was passing around a joint. I smoked a few times. I got into it. It was fun. It was new. It was exciting. And, maybe then it was a little bit hard to stop because it was a way to hang out, a way to connect with friends, a way to goof off. But, when I got to yeshiva and it was against the rules, or it started becoming something there was other reasons why it was uncomfortable for me to smoke. Mom and dad were really hurt by it, so they curtail their use to the point where it's either not an issue or they stop completely. Same thing with drinking. Drinking is a lot of fun. We do it on Shabbatons. We do it on Friday night. We sit all night singing, or we just have a really, rambunctious time. But of course, I'm not, it's regular Tuesday night, I have Seder the next morning. That's not going to happen. And they stop also, let's say, but if you have a guy who it can't stop, or it's affecting two areas of his life. It's affecting either his yeshiva life, his home life, or his work life. It's really, damaging something for him. It's hurting him. Or he's dependent on it. He can't, it's like treats it like a cup of coffee. I can't function unless I have my smoke, or unless, I can't fall asleep unless I masturbate. I can't, so that's already, he's dependent on it. He's self-medicating, he's self-soothing, and it's getting out of control. So that's when it becomes an addiction, okay? And it's happening for a while. What's the difference between, a peer group where you see, they all, unfortunately, let's say we're in certain yeshivas where, unfortunately, a lot of these guys have smoked pot or looked at pornography or drank too much, you know. But when they start getting serious, Shana Bet, there's some guys who can't stop. There's some guys who they're continuing with this behavior. And then there's the third year guy who's still doing this. That's already like a trauma indicator. He's doing it because he needs it. It's giving him something beyond a fun time or a good time, even at the cost of losing chavrusas or other things. So that's trauma. Another way a person can become addicted and not be able to stop is become such a habit. And that stems from early exposure. He was exposed to it from an early age. He started doing these things at a young age, and it's so embedded in his behavior. He's so used to doing it, and it becomes a habit. Now, also because of self-soothing, but also early exposure to it. A third thing would be genetics, right? His father's an alcoholic, so he's an alcoholic. His father had a stack of Playboys in the house where he was growing up, and now he's doing it, on the computer. So it's something that got embedded in him from his parents. It's something that maybe his grandfather struggled with. Infidelity. Everyone knew Grandpa Joe was, a philanderer, and so now he has this proclivity for it. So it could be some part of his genetic makeup. Any of these three things could be a predictor for what would turn this person into an addict. So to understand these addictive behaviors, to look beyond, and it's so important. It really helped me so much to learn that 85% of addicts have a sexual or physical abuse component in their childhood. That's a tremendous number. That's like, something that I only learned working for Amudim, who's constantly dealing with addicts and eating disorders in girls. But these two things, addicts for boys, like drug addiction specifically, and eating disorders in girls, these things were directly related to abuse. And it could be abuse firsthand, or a sibling got abused, or someone else got abused, a very close person to them got abused. This is a really high number. It really helped me understand not to look at this kid as a troublemaker, not to look at this kid as something that you can stop. Like John mentioned before, like, hey, stop cutting yourself. Don't you know that's crazy? So we have a tendency to look at an addict as someone who is doing something which he can stop. But if he is a real addict, and it came from one of these three things, trauma, early exposure, or genetics, it's really, he needs help. He can't stop. Trust me, he wants to. And if he could have, and he probably tried, if he could have, he would have. Because remember, an addict, it's affecting 2 out of 3 areas of their life in a bad way. So they've thought about it. Now we're all approaching Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. You could be sure that he prayed on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur last year and the year before to stop. Hashem, please take it away. I don't want to do this anymore. Right? But he can't. So it's really important not to judge this person, to realize that it came from a pain inside him. He's self-soothing, he's medicating, or he had reckless parents. He saw his parents smoking pot, his parents were drinking, early exposure. He was a little kid and it got stuck somewhere in his psyche. It's not processed. He messed with his parents subconsciously, psychologically, and he can't get out of this behavior. Okay, so this is something that we have to have tremendous amount of compassion when we see an addict, and talk to them from a place of, you need help, we want to help you. This is not about, us not allowing it in the yeshiva. Of course we don't allow it in the yeshiva. But the reason why we don't allow it in the yeshiva is because it's bad for you, it's hurting you. It's them the same way we wouldn't allow you in yeshiva to do anything that hurt you or another student. This is something that is dangerous. This is something that could hurt you long-term in your life, and we want to get you help, right? To stay away from any blame, stay away from any, victim blaming, because a lot of times these kids are victims. Okay, what's next on this? So understanding addictive behaviors, and now I think we're moving into the really heavy stuff. which I'm going to hand back to John. He gets the lucky heavy stuff.
Okay.
If anybody has
Understanding
any questions, awesome.
Okay. Okay. Understand suicide behavior. All right. So maybe this goes without saying. What is suicidal behavior? Any action that could cause a person to die, such as taking a drug overdose or crashing a car on purpose. You can add in also, again, suicide can be one of a number of all kinds of different things. And the purpose is generally to escape the pain. All right, this we talked about an abort button earlier in regards to cutting, getting that feeling of euphoria, or an abort button in terms of a hyper-aroused state where they hit the abort button on reality currently, they dissociate and enter into a different state of mind that is other than here. Suicide is that ultimate abort button. The one that there's no going back, from, and it's to get rid of all this pain. Warning signs. Okay, what to look out for. These are some of the obvious ones. Students talking about killing themselves, right? Nothing should be taken lightly, especially not with teenagers. Oh, just kidding, or oh, it's just a joke, or I had a bad day, but any talk about suicide should always be taken seriously. Even if the guy adamantly denies it, says, no, it's just, that's something I say sometimes it should be taken seriously. It's not worth taking a chance. Feeling hopeless. You see guys that are feeling really, really hopeless. Now, like Yochanan was saying before, it doesn't mean that every hopeless guy is suicidal. Just because he's feeling hopeless doesn't mean he's also thinking about jumping off the roof of the yeshiva, God forbid. But feeling hopeless can be a red flag sometimes. Having no reason to live or expressing no reason to live. What's the point of it all? It's always the same stuff all over and over again. Nobody loves me. What am I even doing here? What's the purpose of life? There's really nothing going for me. Those are some red flags. I'm just a burden to other people. Nobody likes me. I'm just, I'm always causing trouble. I can't do anything right. It'd be better if I wasn't here. Feeling extraordinarily trapped, hopeless. There's no way out. I'm stuck in this position again. Or unbearable pain. I'm in such a terrible, terrible spot. I'm so overwhelmed by life. This is so terrible. So again, it doesn't mean that unbearable pain means they're going to kill themselves or thinking about it. Feeling trapped doesn't mean, but these are some of the things that, can be red flags when you hear guys talking about, especially if the intensity of the talk is extreme, and especially if it's consistent. If you hear these themes coming up in conversation between you and them, or them and other guys over and over again, those are red flags. There's more behavioral red flags. Going back to some of the things that Yochanan mentioned before, somebody's overeating a lot, somebody's showing zero care in their hygiene, not caring about life, making phone calls, kind of preparing for the end type of things. Those are also obvious. Those are obvious red flags rather. Okay. Effectively addressing it. What do I do in the event that there is cause for concern, that I'm afraid that there's something going on here that's serious. There's been enough red flags to cast doubt as to whether or not this person's in danger. That is enough. So what to do in cases where I'm seeing the red flags? What do I do with that? And what to do in cases when this guy is actively suicidal, right? Hopefully this is something that won't be experienced over the year, but again, unfortunately, there have been horror stories that we've all heard about. What do I do when this guy is saying, I'm going to kill myself, or I've got a huge bottle of pills underneath my bed and I'm going to take it tonight? Or that razor I've been using to self-harm I'm telling you about, I'm going to use it for real this time to end it all. Or I'm going out with my buddies tonight. I'm going to this this really tall building, and what do I do when there is an imminent threat and the guy's really serious? So one is, like we mentioned before, always take them seriously. Don't err on the side of caution. Don't pretend. Don't say, I'm sure he's fine. He must have had a really hard day, or he promised me he's never going to do it. He just thinks about it sometimes. These are red flags. Take them seriously. You can also ask him about a plan when he's mentioned suicide. Does he have a plan? A sense of, how he's going to do it. A plan is always another step forward into the deep end. Again, I mentioned with self-harm, perhaps even more important this time, let the yeshiva know. And like Yochanan said, let him know that you're going to let the yeshiva know. This shouldn't be a secret. Now, if the guy says, I'm going to kill myself right now, if you tell the yeshiva, okay, so, play it smart. It may be in extenuating circumstances. You're going to have to figure out a way to let the yeshiva know if you're afraid he's actually going to do it. In most cases, though, let him know. You're not keeping this our little secret. The yeshiva needs to know that he's really in distress. The yeshiva needs to know that he's engaging in suicidal thoughts and has strong suicidal urges, that he's got a plan, to do something. The yeshiva needs to be involved. Make certain the student is safe until he's evaluated or admitted to a hospital. You let the yeshiva know. The yeshiva is involved, but now it's 1 a.m. It's 1 a.m. Either he has to be to admitted to hospital now. He's actively suicidal. Take him to call Machon Dvir and Amudim, or if he's willing to go, get him in a taxi, go with him, take him to the hospital. He should not be going alone. It shouldn't be one of these cases of, I got this one, I'll take care of myself, I'll go. That's a no-no. He needs to be monitored until he gets there. The yeshiva needs to make sure that he is safe, and as the madrich, usually it's going to fall on you to accompany him to the hospital. And until that happens, he shouldn't be left all by himself. If the call from the yeshiva is that you're going to a psychiatrist tomorrow morning, he doesn't need to go to hospital now, but he must be evaluated tomorrow, and the call is that he is still a risk, he should be monitored then. He shouldn't be sleeping in a room by himself. He shouldn't be going off for long walks on himself. The yeshiva should make sure that he is safe. Take away anything dangerous. If you know that this person is being medicated and either in the past he's overdosed or he's threatened to overdose, or this is something you're concerned about, take his medication. It'll be on you. Ask him at what points in time he needs to receive the medication. You'll give it out to him, or the yeshiva will give it out to him. But he shouldn't have things at his disposal that are dangerous. He shouldn't have knives, at his disposal. Lots of alcohol he keeps under his bed. He shouldn't have alcohol, but he can risk alcohol poisoning and killing himself that way, God forbid. Be firm in taking responsible action while explaining rationale, right? So on the one hand, explaining to him, I'm doing this because I want what's best for you. I'm telling the yeshiva because I care about you. You're important to me. I want to keep you safe. That is priority number 1 for me. I'm doing it because I care, not because I want to get you in trouble, not because I'm looking to, make things harder for you. I understand that this is going to be difficult, and I understand you don't want me to do it. I understand, going back to the validation, you don't want me to do this, and I'm going to do it because I care about you and because I want you to get the help that you need. Be firm in that. Set those boundaries. Don't get pulled into that. I'm not going to do it again. This will be the last time. I won't talk about this again. I didn't really mean it when I threatened it. I was just doing it for attention. I wanted your attention. I never should have done it. I'm not going to do it again. Don't be pulled into that. Better safe than sorry. Set a boundary. Be firm and explain to him. Validating and non-judgmental. I see how much pain you're in. I know you don't want me to tell the yeshiva, and I'm going to do it. Again, last one, in an emergency situation, if you're all on your own, if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, yeshiva's not around, or you see that this something's happening now, call 101, call Machon Dvir and Amudim, let them know exactly what's going on. They'll send paramedics in, and they'll take care of it. Okay. Any questions on suicidal behavior, warning signs, or how to effectively address a situation where there's a threat of suicide? Okay, things do not go as planned, right? Things will not follow a nice diagram, like we have on the screen over here. Life doesn't work that way. There's always curveballs in these situations, especially like when Yochanan was talking about earlier, dealing with personality disorders. There's always going to be a very complicated presentation, and it's always going to be emotionally trying on you, the one involved. That's something, again, taking that step back, like was mentioned earlier by Yochanan, is extraordinarily important. Reminding yourself, of the kind of things that are on the slide over here, reminding yourself of what can be done. If you need to get the kind of that cerebral override of, I feel like I want to align with him. I really feel like I'm being pulled in. I don't want to tell the yeshiva. I'm afraid of what telling the yeshiva will do. Maybe I should just trust him. It'll be the last time. To remind yourself, not a good idea. right? To stick to those boundaries, to stick to the guidelines, so to speak. Do what is most responsible. Again, this is both for him, but also for you. You don't want to get stuck in a situation where you're in over your head, and the responsibility is solely on you. You feel completely overwhelmed and drowning in something that is just too much. So again, it's not fair to you, and it's also not fair to them.
Excellently said. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
And obviously, this is, not common in a yeshiva setting, but it happens. And, forewarned is forearmed. I was in a yeshiva, a pretty big yeshiva. I was in a few yeshivas, and we certainly had kids who went into this place. And it started with what you would call a normal depression, and they descended deeper and deeper. They disassociated from themselves. Like they went deeper and deeper into this depression, to the point where by the time they tried to take their life, they were already in some kind of psychotic state. It was like the beginning of some kind of psychosis. Okay, so it's something to start noticing when the guy's in bed for a few days. That's already something that can lead to suicidal behavior. A person so deep in a depression, really need to get him help before it can get worse. And like I mentioned already earlier, you guys are the front line, the eyes and ears of this kid's life. Often these kids, right, they're far away from home. Nobody else is checking in on them regularly. And it could be they don't have a good relationship with their family and don't talk to their family. Maybe they talk to their family once a week, or maybe they lie to their family to protect them from the harsh reality and say, I'm okay. You can see that they're not okay. And you really need to get these guys into treatment. If a guy's resistant to treatment, right? No, I don't want to do it. I can't afford it. This is where you need to basically get Amudim or Machon Dvir or an organization involved. Call someone, see what to do, get advice. Certainly, we don't want to be like holding any of these things on our own. And really, part of us doing this presentation is also to let you know and let the yeshivas know that we are here for this population, specifically for the Anglo student population. This is what we deal with. This is what we are, tasked to do. Thank God for Amudim specifically. We are funded by, we do fundraiser every year. People donate to this cause so that we can be available, so we can help. People call us, do you charge for your services? No, anybody can call us. Anybody can come to our office and meet with us for free. Obviously, we don't do clinical treatment. For that, then we could refer you, to John. We could refer you to Machon Dvir to get, a comprehensive treatment, which this kid really needs. But if this kid isn't ready for treatment, so then just get him to meet, call us instead. And hopefully we'll be able to, work together until we could get him to a place like Machon Dvir, which will be able to, enroll this kid into a program. A lot of guys I've noticed don't want a treatment. They don't want it. They don't want a fuss being made. It's not a big deal. Or they're concerned financially. What can we do? These things are expensive. They don't want to be a burden. They don't want their parents to find out. That's really an opportunity to avail yourselves to Amudim services. Not that we pay for therapy. We don't pay for therapy. But if a kid has a real problem, we work very hard to figure out a way, how are we going to get this kid money? So it's not just on the Rebbe, it's not just on the yeshiva. The yeshiva usually does help. The yeshiva will pay for a bit. They have a donor maybe who is sympathetic to this cause, and Amudim will find resources. We'll call, any family members have money. Maybe there's a friend. If the kid was abused, we'll work with the kid. I've seen students come into our office and resistant to help, but they had a good relationship with their case manager, and eventually people did reach out to their family to get funding and get help. So, if you can't you can't always solve the problem by facing the problem head on, right? So sometimes all you can do is just sometimes just make the connection. Let them make a connection to a case manager. Let them make a connection to someone in the mental health profession. A connection with you. Just keep the connection with you, the Madrich, the Rebbe, and that's what you can do right now. That's first base. We're not going to hit a home run every time. We're not going to streamline a guy into full, treatment with groups and with, therapy, but, we'll get him slowly around the idea that, help is on the way. And we'll remind him that, eventually the guy will say, okay, now I'm ready for therapy. In the beginning, I was very resistant, and now maybe I'll try it. So first base is first base. That's the connection with you. That's the connection. They'll talk to you. You then can call, Machon Dvir and Amudim to get a little bit more specific advice, how to deal with a specific case. Don't be shy. We're here for you.
Okay, thank you, Yochanan. Any questions from either Yehuda or Nachum before we end?
No, very clear. Thank you.
Okay,
We'll see.
thank you. Sure. Okay.
Okay.
regards to addiction, there's often a lot of resistance and a lot of denial, and very hard to get people into therapy. They'll often say, "This is just who I am. It's my life choice, etc."
I know that's really why I gave my little plug here at the end, because especially with guys, it's a real taboo situation. Something's wrong. Something's wrong with me if I'm speaking to a therapist, or I'm a failure if I speak to a therapist. I'm a loser. It means that there's still so much taboo for the typical average yeshiva guy, even though it's improved tremendously. But for the typical yeshiva guy, it is still a big taboo, and it's a big deal. So it might be you or one of your staff members calls us and says, "Hey, this is what we're dealing with. At this point, the guy's resistant. Can you give us some guidance?" And we'll work from where we can work for. I'll just give you a nice little example of, let's say you are in a big mall or a big amusement park, right? So you need to go to the bathroom. That's where the relief is, right? You need the bathroom. You drank one of those big sodas that you bought, and you find the map, in front of Great Adventures. There's the map of the theme park, or you're in a mall, and oh, great. You see that picture, WC, water closet, whatever, but that's what I'm looking for. And I find it on the map, but I can't get there yet. The only way I can start to get to the WC, to get to that relief, is if I first find the red dot on the map, right? The only place we could start from is our starting point. It doesn't help us to know that the goal for this guy is treatment. What helps us, more importantly, is to know, where are we with this guy? Where are we now? And really assess. And for that, you might need to call us. You might not. Maybe you've got, you have a staff meeting and you figure out where he is. But there's no harm in calling us to find out, where is this guy holding? But you could do it on your own. And if you assess where he is, then you can see the red dot is where we are. And then the next step is it's really a 15-minute walk to the bathroom. Sorry, but at least you can get there, right? And, you're going to have to pass a few, stores along the way. And one of those stores might be case management. One of those stores might be a Madrich going above the call of duty and spending an evening out with him for a pizza. One of those stores along the way might be inviting this kid to a Friday night dinner meal at your home. Those are the stores along the way.
Perhaps you can tell me, Yochanan, more about Amudim. I'm not very familiar with the organization. What's it designed to do?
So, okay, well, I'm going to do it in a nutshell. So I'm going to keep John here. But, Amudim does crisis case management. So our number one thing that we deal with is someone finds out that they were abused or discloses they were abused. The teacher, the madrich, calls us, or they're encouraged to call us themselves. It's the first time they're away from home, So they're up at 11 o'clock at night, schmoozing with a madrich. That's something they haven't done since camp. They haven't done that in a long time. They're already in yeshiva for a month or two. They feel like they have a good connection, and they begin to open up, and they have a serious problem. It's a drinking problem. It's a masturbation problem, or it's, God forbid, something worse. So they call us. The Rebbe or the Madrich says you need help. They agree to get help, and we assess what they need, and we usually put them into, we refer them to someone else. We do refer to Machon Dvir. We collaborate with Machon Dvir. So if they need a psychiatrist, Shmuel Harris, who is the head of Machon Dvir, we can send to him. There's other therapists, there's other psychiatrists that sometimes fit this specific case better. So we send to those. We try to make, we're like shadchanim. Another thing we do is we provide support. We'll develop a relationship with this guy and say, hey, was that therapist good? Did it work out for you? Did you like this psychiatrist? Do you feel like the medication is working? If not, maybe we could be in direct contact. And John and I have communicated over the last couple of years, with certain shared clients that we have. What are we doing for this guy? We've even collaborated financially. There was a Rebbe who was helping out financially. How much are we going to get for this guy? So sometimes the financial piece is necessary. It's very difficult, obviously, but it's something we have to do. We're not a bank, but we can be creative with how we're going to get this kid money. We're good schnurrs. What else so someone can call, I'll call this guy every 2 weeks for as long as he's my client until he's really set up in treatment. And then I'll call him once a month, and then I'll start calling him every 6 weeks until he tells me, Yochanan, you don't need to call me anymore. I've got a therapist. I'm okay. It's working. It's okay. But I'll check in, and I'm not a therapist, so I can kind of break certain boundaries the therapist needs to hold more in place. I can go out for a coffee with the guy. A therapist's not going to do that. But I'm a case manager. It's a bit more Hamish. I can do that. V'chule. We do other things as well, like training programs and all these types of things. We speak to teachers, we give advice, we sometimes do school placement. Let's say a guy's getting kicked out of your yeshiva, you want to help him to get into a different place that's better for him, or that's more suitable for him. So we'll try to collaborate, we'll try to figure out a better place. And there's a lot that we do, but obviously there's a lot we can't do, because like you said, when there's resistance, you can only help a guy as much as he's willing to be helped. And it's a big frustration we all struggle with. And we get compassion fatigue with these guys, because it's hard to feel bad for them when they resist us. But that's when we need to learn about Madrich self-care. Jonathan Yashikoach, I loved your slides and everything. Amazing.
Okay, thank you very much. You as well. Thank you very much for the presentation and working together on it. I appreciate it.